uh, Mayor Elizabeth Samlin. At the very outset, let me thank Professor for inviting me to make this talk. I'm so much delighted to see my friend and colleague, Professor being here. So it was a limited experience to see you, sir, here, and it's so nice that we are here and we're spending around 2 hours of time with the student. I'm also taking this opportunity to welcome all the PhD students and other faculty members who are present here. Before I start, my request to all the students, please keep your camera open so that I can see the face and make some human interaction. And otherwise, I'll be simply watching the desktop and your still photo, and that will not be inspiring enough to talk to the audience. So my suggestion would be, I find around 55, 54 participants here. So I request everybody to keep your camera open so that the interaction is quite good. Let me start with a very small note. That is, I'm happy to learn that all of the PhD students, PhD scholars, and a lot of dreams in mind and in heart to excel in life, to enter into profession as a PhD student, as a PhD scholar, have been cooperatively with you with some suffix and prefixes that are really stimulating and exciting. But keep in mind, when you are doing the PhD, you are also contributing not only to excel your career, you are contributing to generate a new body of knowledge which many of us may not be knowing. So what is important that you should understand the big responsibility vested on you as a scholar of the PhD program. So you have to know the world in your own way. You will bring out new social facts. You will bring out new interpretation and new analysis that will be stimulating and that will be exciting not only the elderly generation, those who are going away, but also the incoming generation and also those who are in the profession. So it's a big responsibility to you as a student you are carrying with you. Please keep in mind that is quite important. Now, when I'll be talking this today's talk, I'll be dividing into 4 different segments. The first segment I'll be talking about the context in which society in India and society in general is located today. That is quite important. Many of you may be studying, you look into the PhD self of this, UGC or other. We find some of the typical kind of thing, women's empowerment, Panchayati Raj, agrarian transformation, changing role and status of women, and then we'll be finding social movement is one, social mobility is another. Those are some of the areas people keep on doing the research. But anything, all research areas are important in their own term, because no research is isolated, no research topic is isolated from each other. So if you are to understand agrarian society, you are also to understand the industrial society, because it is the failure of the agrarian society pushing the people to go to the industrial society. So there is a connectivity between the agrarian and industrial in terms of migration, in terms of economic reciprocity between these two kinds of societies. So each and every research topic is important. But before indulging to the research topic, what is important that we should know the context in which we will be undertaking our research. So first topic, my first attempt would be to develop an understanding of the context in which we will be undertaking our research today, number one. Number two, as I have in consultation with Professor Sudeshna Mukherjee, I have decided I'll be talking on this changing dynamics in the knowledge society. So second, my task would be to talk about the identity. What do we mean by identity? And third, we will be talking about the knowledge society. And fourth segment, we will be talking about the interface between the identity and knowledge society. Putting in the whole context to which I have narrated at the very outset, but I'll be narrating now. What is the context of the contemporary society? We should go for that. I believe this framework will be easy for all the students to understand, because you will have to understand the context. That is important. So let us understand what is the context in which we are located today. Gradually we talk about, even not even being a social scientist, the general people in our everyday kind of interaction, we talk about we are living in a very fast transitional society. We are living in a globalized society. We are living in a society guided by information and communication technologies. We widely talk about. We also widely talk about in terms of how our human relationships are getting redefined in every day and getting decontextualizing every day, and we are redefining so many of our old institutions and bringing in a new institution. So what we find simultaneously, a rearranging of the social categories also. That is, we talked about the agrarian categories, we talked about the industrial categories, rural, urban, men, women, peasants, the farmers, the tribal, the caste, the religion, various kinds of categories we talk about. But those categories are not independent of the social context in which we are located today. So let us talk about how we will understand our social context in the contemporary world. Let us understand, I rather put underline 4 important components which we must understand in which we are located today. Those are economic neoliberalism, number 1. Number 2 is the modernity, post-modernity and hyper-modernity. Number 3 is quite important, is the risk of what we call a cultural politics across the globe. And 4th important factor is that resurgence of populism of its own variety. So these 4 important components widely guiding our life situation. We as a social being, so as a sociologist, we'll have to understand how the human society is getting conditioned with these 4 important processes. So let me talk about the economic neoliberalism. If we were to talk about the economic neoliberalism, perhaps we'll have to understand the whole way the society got evolved from a pre-market to a market society. So at this point, I'll rather request all of you, just one minute, there is a little bit of it's fine now. There was a little bit of problem with that. Am I audible? I mean, I want some. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So when we are talking about what we call this economic neoliberalism, we have to understand the transition of the society from pre-market to that of the market society. I request all the students, you must read one book of Karl Polanyi's The Great Transformation. This is quite important. You must. It's a very small book, around 135 or 137 pages. You will find everywhere in the market. Also, it's available online. You can get it downloaded. Karl Polanyi's The Great Transformation. What Karl Polanyi talks about, that is, the society has undergone a huge kind of a transformation. The first transformation took place in the society when he got transferred from a pre-market to a market society. What was the pre-market society? Pre-market society was not a marketplace society. It was a society. While market was serving the need of the society. So it was. Market was embedded in equal terms. And because when there is a society, human society, gradually there is kind of transaction. But what happened gradually, that pre-market society emerged to a market society with the gradual penetration and emergence of what we call industrial capitalism and emergence of the commoditized production at the market. So what happened? It is the society started serving the market. And when it emerged, society became a subservient to the market, when it is the first great transformation in the human society. And that transformation accompanied the whole process of industrialization, development of capitalism, and also simultaneously expansion of colonialism. And this thing continued till 1929 and 1930s. 1930s and 29 is quite important because the whole globe saw a huge kind of a collapse of the economic order, because market capitalism was unable to respond to the need of the society. It came the huge unemployment, Great Depression that it talks about. That time there emerged and the late 1920s emerged the Keynesian economics, the welfare economy. The state started indulging in some welfare activities, because if you leave everything to the market and capitalism, society will not be able to flourish. So there was a need for another kind of economic perspective. So what we find, 1930s onward, there emerged the welfare economy. State is to involve with the health, with employment, with the education, and other kind of welfare activities, besides maintaining the law and order and the boundary of the country. So a new kind of economy emerged. And that continued. That time, the whole process of New Deal came. That is the Keynesian economy and the New Deal. And gradually that process continued till 1980s. What we find in the 1980s, that economic order was unable to bear the burden and development of what we call the Fordist kind of capitalism, a new kind of capitalism. So what emerged? There emerged a new kind of a world, what we call an unipolar world rather than a bipolar world. That is the Washington Consensus gave kind of directives to all the banking institutions to suffice the need of the society in the economic term. So what we find that time in the late 1980s and early 1990s, we find the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the USSR, and total hegemonic emergence of the capitalist world with a new form, what we call the economic neoliberalism. Here comes the Foucault's, the famous treatise, the famous book, The End of the History and the Last Man. So what defined? That defined now we live in a world of what we call economic neoliberalism that defines there is no society, there is only one thing, that's market. Market's generative appetite for your food. It is not the food that you need in terms of your metabolism, in terms of your own need. You need those food which is advertised in the market. You need the pizza, burger, and different kind of dish which is given by the Zomatos and given by the others. Because there is no society, it is the market. Market is defining needs and every space of your existence. So there is no society, there is only market. But at this point, I like to draw your attention. In late 80s, Margaret Thatcher gave a big kind of statement. He told there is no society, there is no community in the world, there is only one market. And many of the sociologists challenge that is, how is it? There is society, but it is a society, that's why they are sociologists. But ultimately they come to the conclusion, yes, there is a society, but society is conditioned by the market. So market determinism is widely conditioning our life. This is the life widely defined by economic neoliberalism. Should there be any question at the end? I'll give more answer to the economic neoliberalism. Now come to along with the change in the economic neoliberalism, emergence of economic neoliberalism, there is the process of change from modernity to post-modernity, from post-modernity to the hyper-modernity. What we call modernity? Modernity we define in terms of the cultural parameters that give a universal definition of the progress in terms of the progress taking place in the Western Europe and North America. It also looks into the production process and the Fordist kind of a production process through industrial mechanism, and that also reflected a new kind of modernity in terms of democracy, in terms of formal education, new kind of cultural attire, and also new kind of administrative advancement through formal bureaucracy, etc. So what we find, the whole kind of development of the society to neoliberalism is also accompanied by a kind of development of modernity. But that modernity is now challenged with the emergence of what we call post-modernity. What is post-modernity? Post-modernity challenges that universal formation of a Western kind of a progress, of a universal kind of a progress, liberty, fraternity, and justice. What is widely Western term? It is going to be contextualized in terms of local need. So what they define in terms of the fragmentation, in terms of new kind of a growth, and that is need not to be universal. So what they define, there is a kind of plurality of the human self, plurality of social formation, plurality of the script, discourses, and desire. So it is not universality of the progress and definition that is defined by Western capitalism. There is also so many kind of new kind of a formation. So those who are the student of social anthropology, you must have read Lévi-Strauss's the whole what it talks about the mana, what it talks about bricoleur and the bricolage, how the small kind of things, rituals and practices defines everybody's everyday life, and so their own kind of a universe. That is the development of the seed of the development of post-modernity. So what the sense I'm trying to make here, that is modernity is changed, the universal parameter is changed by another kind of a formation, what we call a kind of a localized formation that critique the universality. When the modernity talks about the plurality, there is also emergence of what we call the hyper-modernity. This is widely talked about by Alain Touraine, it talked about, and also Anthony Giddens had widely talked about. When you talk about the hyper-modernity, it emphasizes on all this local formation, but simultaneously in terms of instanity, it's something to be very quick, urgency, instant gratification of the need. And it is kind of a self-absorbed consumers and sovereignty of the consumer in terms of their instant need, instant urgency, that there is no time. There is no time to wait. So here is the life, here and now, that is to be satisfied instantly. So here comes the emergence of hyper-modernity. So what I talk first, there is economic neoliberalism that is followed by simultaneously modernity, challenged by post-modernity and emergence of hyper-modernity that is conditioning our life. The third thing that is widely conditioning our life, what we call the emergence of populism. That is quite important. Populism are the people, they are the people, they claim to be the moral and the authentic people and to be the true representative of the people. And they claim to be the 100% representative of the people. And they go in terms of large-scale mass mobilization, promotes exclusion and inclusion in the name of culture, ethnicity, economy, historicity, and creates new symbol of unity and new kind of a rhetorics as a means of communication. And many times, religion also used as a part of populist agenda to redefine the unity in the society. So what is important when you're talking about populism, we are talking about resurgence of a new kind of a cultural parameters that is widely talking of large-scale mass mobilization in terms of true representative of the people, promoting exclusion in the name of primordiality, culture and ethnicity, at times economy and also history. They're redefining the history and uniting the people to change the elite structure of the society. So what they are widely they critique the elite formation of the society and also so-called intellectual formation of the society. It is the mass mobilization in terms of totality. Fourth important phenomenon that is important, emergence of, that is linked to the populism, emergence of what I call the new way politics. What is the new way politics? It defines the people in terms of the cultural entity, and the cultural entity as against the economic and consumerist entity. So it endeavors to unite the people in terms of traditional cultural practices as against the modernity and post-modernity, emphasizes on the revival of the traditional cultural symbols and the practices, and try to organize people, develop a sense of inclusion and exclusion in terms of one's affinity to certain cultural idioms and symbols. So what we are finding, four important phenomenon is widely conditioning our life in contemporary world. Number one, economic neoliberalism. Number two, modernity, hypermodernity and postmodernity. Third, what we are talking about, populism. And fourth, I talked about in terms of a new way of politics, rather a cultural politics that is taking shape across the world. So that is the first component you want to understand. Within that, we will understand another category, another process, that is an identity. Many a time, we, as a sociologist, we know that we use the term identity very frequently. And when we use the term identity, at times our conceptual categorization of the identity remains quite vague. So what is warranted out of a research scholar and the student, that is, they should give a lot of emphasis on understanding identity. What is identity and what is not identity? That is quite important. So let us understand what are the problematics in defining an identity. Problematic is that it is very transformative. It is never fixed. It is transformative, and many times we talk about it is a transformative change agent of the society. It shifts from structure to an agency. It is not structure in itself. So when we talk about structure of an entity, not identity, entity. Say caste is an entity. Caste is having a structure. It is the network of social relationship in which a caste is founded. Network of a caste relationship in terms of the upper caste, lower caste. Similarly, those who are living in the sideline, so it is take into consideration varieties of the relationship in which the caste is located. That is an entity. But when the caste acquire an amount of consciousness as an agency to locate the inequality, look at the process of mobility, look at the process of aspiration and enhancement of the community, empowerment of the society, it gets transformed into an agency. That's why when we talk about identity, we have to understand it is not only an entity, it's an identity. It gets transformed from structure to an agency. When it gets transformed, so what we're having another kind of problem, that is, it is transition, it is multiple, and it is never fixed. And it is never straight-jacketed, it's not a singular. So there is the possibility of multiplicity remain associated when you identify an identity out of an entity. That is a structure to an agency. So when we're talking that's why we find it transit from solidarity to fluidity, from culture to secular, from essential to construction, identity as an end in itself to a means to an end. Also, it may be an ethical, it may be a non-ethical identity. The varieties of problems keeps on coming. So it's not just simultaneously, you will find that it gets transformed with the transformation of the society. That's why many times it is talked about identity is complex, not only because identity itself as a process, identity itself as an entity is complex. It is complex because of the complex definition of human being itself. Because we define human being on the one hand to be rational, empirical, calculated, moral, sympathetic, empathetic creature. On the other hand, we also define human being the dark side of humanity, selfish, brutish, solitary, ugly. So all varieties of component is in a human being. So when you talk about identity, many times it becomes a mix of both. So what we'll have to understand when we're talking about identities, we'll have to understand how we are segregating identities from those non-identities. Now, when we talk about identities, in social science we usually use as a cover term. We talk in terms of, as I told, at times we talk about the structure of a given entity. At times we define in terms of the status and role. I mean, say, out one of the famous scholar, he talks about let identity be a cover term only. And let it be defined by striker, that is defined in terms of one's role relations in the society. Those are founded on given status of a particular group. But when we come away from this status and role and the cover term formulation, there is another category of the scholar. Manuel Castles, Alain Torine, and many others, they talked about you acquire the status of an entity, identity out of an entity. It is important. You should have a particular meaning to having that kind of an identity, and the legitimacy to have an action that defines the identity. So that's why Anthony Giddens talks about it's a process of individuation and reflexivity. What is individuation? A process of bringing forth your inner self of feeling and aspiration to the forefront and mix it with a new kind of a meaning and legitimacy. It acquires the status of an identity. So what is important? That is, you want to differentiate the individual self from that of a collective self. Where an individual self, you put it at the back end when you talk about your collective self, when you bring it at the forefront. I know it is quite difficult when you talk about a caste entity. We talk about a process of locating somebody within the given structural arrangement of the society. When we talk about a kind of a caste entity, we not only talk in terms of location in a particular order or ethnic group in some particular order, we also talk them in terms of acquired aspiration, acquired reflexivity, acquired consciousness within the given order. So what is important? An amount of self-perception about themselves guided by individuation, meaning and reflexivity. So what is important? That is, when you talk about the whole process, it also leads to two varieties of transition, what we call from transition from essentialism to the constructionism. What is essentialism? That is, you have already acquired some of the status, acquired some of the entity, that is your essential entity, but when you get it constructed with amount of subjectivity, so it becomes a matter of subjective construction. That's why Stuart Hall, who is one of the famous social scientists, he talks about it is a discursive cultural construction of an entity. It is module, fabricated, and artifact, and that is applied to certain situations. So there is a possibility that when you are constructing that identity, you are trying to be true in the eyes of others, maybe false from within. When you construct an identity, it is not important what you are. It is important how others are looking towards you. So, what the 3 points I made with regard to the identity: number one, it is very flexible. Number two, it's having essential component, but it goes undergoes construction, and it is both is a cultural specific. And fifth important factor is that when we are talking about identity construction, is linked to the power relationship in the society. When I talk about how it is linked to the power relationship, it is linked to what is power. Capacity to exercise is in spite of somebody's resistance. That's the power. When the power gets legitimized, it becomes a authority. Usually that is the way we have understand power, how it is defined by the postmodernists like the Foucault, Derrida, and many others. I'll just talk to Foucault and Bourdieu, the way they have defined the power and social structure relationship. They talked about What is the source of power? Sources of power is the discourse. That is it is the discourse that is the source of power. A thing, an element, or an object which is discussed, it becomes a source of power. So it is linked to the structural arrangement of the society. What is the structure? Structure is linked to the culture, because the culture defines what are the things to be discussed and what are the things not to be discussed. So what we find, that is, a discourse is linked to the structural arrangement of the society, structure is linked to the culture, and culture decides what are the things to be discussed and what are the things not to be discussed. So by defining what are the things to be discussed and what are the things not to be discussed, so it is the structure that exercises its own power, and structure is controlled by the people, those who control the discourse. So what we find in the society, there is always a tension between the control and repression on the one hand, and the urge for liberation on the other. So what we find, a kind of binaries in the society in terms of social versus anti-social, stigmatized identities, rather illogized identity. But those identities gradually, what Bourdieu talks about the habitus, a process of socialization in which some elements of truth is accepted as a truth, some element of truth is not accepted as a truth. A kind of gradual process of inculcation of cultural and values that get internalized in the mind of the people who accept something as a true and something as a false. So what is important? A kind of relationship within which an identity is getting constructed, that is quite important. So again, I'll sum up what I talked about in the context of identity formation. Identity is flexible. Number one, it undergoes transition. Number three, it is a process of essentialization and construct in the society. So what we find, when there is a process of transition of the society from pre-market to market, to modernity to post-modernity and hyper-modernity, then there is a process of